Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of A Second Chance Stories of Young Offenders. We're your hosts, Kalista
And Akshara, and we have another surprise guest joining us. Briana Payton, a graduate of Princeton University and the University of Chicago, serves as a passionate advocate for transformative justice in the criminal legal system. With a background in sociology and policy analysis, Briana brings sharp analytical skills and impeccable communication to a role as senior policy analyst at the Chicago Appleseed Center for Fair Courts. Her commitment to addressing racial injustice is deeply rooted in personal relationships and diverse experiences across research, policy, government, nonprofit, and educational spaces.
Hi Brianna, we just want to start off by expressing our gratitude for you joining us today. We are so excited to hear your perspectives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Of course. So to start off, I guess we can just ask, how is your advocacy, for radical transformation in the criminal legal system evolved since your time at university, considering your varied experiences in research, policy, government, nonprofit, and educational spaces?
Yeah, it's definitely been something that has taken different shapes depending on the context that I found myself in. So, I really started out doing advocacy work in undergrad when I was just an active and enthusiastic member and leader of Black Student Union on my campus. But, from being involved in Black student community on campus, I started to learn about ways that people were experiencing racism and discrimination. And so that became a launch pad for raising awareness through different photo campaigns and initiatives to help people understand what it was like for Black students on Princeton's campus when I was there. But then in 2014, the summer after my freshman year of college, when Michael Brown was killed and the 2014 iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement erupted, I think that marked a shift for what my advocacy looked like, because it moved from being about our experiences as Black students on Princeton's campus to a broader focus on what was being experienced by our community members across the country outside of, college campuses and in our communities with regards to police brutality and things of that nature. And so our focus turned towards, hosting events to honor victims of police brutality and raise awareness and education about issues with the criminal legal system on campus. And it kind of was combined between focusing on broader issues affecting the Black community nationally and issues affecting us on campus. And so when I graduated college, because of what I had learned about the criminal legal system, I became interested in, becoming a change agent, around that system. I don't want to say in it, because I didn't really aspire to work in the system, so to speak, but I definitely wanted to advocate for change to the system. And so for me, that started as moving to Chicago after undergrad and working in reentry. I worked at the North Lawndale Employment Network, where they support people that were previously incarcerated, who are trying to reenter the workforce and get jobs and things of that nature. And so I worked at that organization, and the work that I did there and connecting people who had been impacted by the criminal legal system just further deepened my passion for that work and helped me to see, especially in the reentry space, there's a lot of conversation about people needing a second chance. But when I was talking to people and learning their stories, I was like, it doesn't really feel like you got a fair first chance. And so I wanted to do work that would set people up to have better chances from the beginning. And so I went back to school to get my master's in social work with a focus on criminal legal system transformation and trauma informed care. And while I was there, I got to intern at the Federal Defender's Office and worked on people's legal cases who were facing federal criminal charges, and trying to help the judges understand their stories to give them compassionate sentences. And that was really meaningful work on an individual level, but it also really showed me that I had a passion for systemic change, because for every one person you advocate for and you spend hours poring over their case and it's totally worth it, there's so many more people that are in that same situation because of the role of systemic injustice in setting so many people up to end up in that exact same spot. And so I wanted to affect things at a systemic level, and at the Chicago Community Bond Fund, an organization that pays bonds for people that can't afford it, who would otherwise stay stuck in jail. And so there I began working on the campaign to passed the Pretrial Fairness Act, which is the law that was going to make Illinois the first state in the country to end money bond. And I got to work on the campaign and see the legislation be passed and help defend the legislation against a multi-million-dollar misinformation campaign last year. And now it's gone into effect this year. And so I've really gotten to see that desire come to pass of advocating for people on a systemic level so that you can help so many people at one time. And I'm really, really grateful for that. And since, being a part of that, I've moved over. I'm still in the same coalition that worked on the Pretrial Fairness Act campaign, the Coalition to End Money Bond, and the statewide Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice. But I've moved over from the Chicago Community Bond Fund to the Chicago Appleseed Center for Fair Courts. I came on as a senior policy analyst in March, but now I am our director of policy and advocacy. So that's kind of where my work is now.
Wow, congratulations. That's amazing, all the work you've done. And I can tell you're really dedicated to transformative justice work. I can tell you're also a very busy lady. How do you balance everything and your analytical aspects of your work? So with the deeply personal relationships you maintain with those directly impacted by the issues that you advocate for.
Yeah, you said, how do I balance it all?
Especially like the personal relationships that you maintain with those impacted by the issues you advocate for.
Yeah,
As
I
long
think,
as well as your personal relationships in life and everything in general.
yeah, totally. I can definitely say that balancing everything has been a trial and error, a learning process, heavy on the error. I have definitely sometimes gone to the extreme of pouring so much time and energy into my work that it is to my own detriment. I think that especially last year, trying to do the community engagement work of helping people to understand the what was the truth behind all of the misinformation that was floating around Illinois about the law that we worked on. There were so many viral videos and fake newspapers and all types of things circulating that was misinforming the community about this work. And so we were a small team of people that were really trying to go into the community to combat that, and we didn't have nearly the same amount of money to just like pay to spend on ads. And so we literally tried to combat that one community forum, one teach-in, one event, one Zoom meeting at a time. And it was a lot, and so being one of the people helping to really hold down that work, I did end up burning out when it was all said and done. Like I had to take a few months off of work because I was pouring so much into the work that I was doing. And so balance has been something that I've had to learn. Boundaries have been something that I've had to learn. I've had to learn that if I want to be in this work for the long haul, I can't just burn myself out in the immediate. I have to think about it as a marathon and not a sprint. And so no matter how much I care about things, now I look at it from the perspective of how can I do this in a way that is sustainable. As far as balancing relationships, I think putting boundaries around my time really helps, like really guarding to the extent that I'm able my evenings and weekends. I obviously work evenings and weekends, on a semi-regular basis for opportunities like this interview or different community events and things of that nature, but I balance it, if I know I'm going to be working late, maybe I give myself the liberty to start late. If I know I'm going to be working on a weekend, maybe I take a couple hours off during the week. And so just making sure that there's overall balance so that I can give the attention that this work deserves, but also that I deserve, that I'm worthy of, and that my other relationships and priorities deserve as well.
I think it's also super inspiring how, like, despite in the beginning, like, you had, like, some problems, like, with, as you said, like, maybe, like, the financial burdens and, like, just, like, maybe, like, a smaller amount of people in your group, how you guys were just really able to, like, power through and just have such a big impact on so many people's lives. But while we're on the topic of your work, reflecting on your experiences with the Princeton internships in civic services in Chicago and your role as a Project 55 fellow at North Lawndale Employment Network. How did these early experiences shape your commitment to serving marginalized communities?
Yeah, those experiences were incredibly influential, especially the internship, because the internship, uh, I did that the summer after my freshman year of college. So in college, I was learning things that was kind of like whole new world Aladdin vibes. Like I was learning about systemic injustice as a sociology major, as an African American studies and American studies and Spanish minor. And I was getting all of this language and understanding of systems that I had low key witnessed my whole life. You know, I'm from Detroit originally. I moved to a suburb of Detroit when I was about halfway through my childhood, and I I saw a lot of inequality. You know, going from the city to the suburbs, from a majority Black impoverished city to a majority white middle class suburb, and seeing those different inequalities. But and when I got to college, I took classes where I started to learn about social class and racial discrimination and all these things in a new way. And so that internship in Chicago, that summer after my freshman year, it was my first experience after having my mind opened in such a new way in college. And so to be going back into the community and seeing how all of these things that I was learning about in college were playing out in the real world, so to speak, it just, it was a very moving experience. You know, you're learning about criminal legal system issues and violence in communities, and then I was interning in Chicago and supporting students who were dealing with the impacts of gun violence and lost their classmates to gun violence. And I was learning in my education in college about education inequality, and then I am in, you know, working with students in a school on the west side of Chicago where they're telling me they're not learning, you know, they're not learning anything, you know. And then I'm learning about issues of with discipline and how zero tolerance practices for both adults and young people have been disproportionately targeted against, you know, members of the Black community. And I'm seeing how this nonprofit is using restorative justice practices to change how young people are treated in their schools. And so it kind of gave me, it created the heart level connection. It's one thing to have the head level connection of everything you're learning about, and it's another thing to see how something plays out every day in people's lives, especially young people's lives. And so ever since then, Chicago has had hooks in my heart. That's why I came back after I graduated college. And that was also my first experience working in a professional nonprofit setting and seeing, oh, you know, you can make a career out of helping people through nonprofit organizations. You know, I did this internship. I'm working with people who do this as their full-time job. Maybe this is something like what I can do when I graduate, to the point that I actually wanted to go back and work for the same organization, Umoja Student Development Corporation. I had aspired to go back and work with them as a PFIT Project 55 fellow after graduating Princeton. But it just so happened that with the year that I was graduating, they weren't taking interns, but I mean, they weren't taking P55 fellows, but it worked out anyway because I ended up doing my fellowship at the North Lawndale Employment Network at an organization focused on reentry. And that ended up being very formative because it further solidified my passion for specifically helping people that are impacted by the criminal legal system. So both of those experiences really did lay the foundation for the work that I want to do for the rest of my life.
Wow, you're very successful, I can tell. It's that, especially what you do, you're very passionate about it. Um,
Thank you.
I think that's amazing, and I know you've grown so much professionally and personally, but specifically in what you learned, and I can tell in what you learned and specific areas of what you've incorporated in your personal and professional life, like areas of fundraising, marketing, and communications during your time at the Lawndale Employment Network. But what specific strategies have you employed to grow professionally
Thank you.
from
Yeah.
where you were before to now?
Yeah, I think the biggest way to grow professionally is just to throw yourself as fully as you can into any professional opportunities that come your way. You know, doing the work in front of you is a huge way to grow, and that's pretty much how I've grown. Like I've put myself out there for to apply for opportunities that match my passions. So when I was a freshman in college and I knew that I was passionate about equal access to educational opportunities, I applied for community service spring break trips that I could go and work with students in New York on their college applications, and I helped them with their essays. And I worked with other Princeton students to talk to them and put on panels for them about college. And so, you know, I didn't even think of it as growing my professional skills at the time, but that's what I was doing because now I do support students professionally. I have my whole own business called Successfully You Consulting, where I work with students and young professionals to help them apply for college or grad school or scholarships or fellowships and things of that nature. And so sometimes just chasing after your passion and doing the work that you care about doing is building your professional skills and you don't even know it. And so I think that's one thing I would say. And definitely not being afraid to try new things. So, for example, when I applied for the Project 55 fellowship to work at the North Lawndale Employment Network, I didn't technically have a ton of experience with fundraising and development, but I did have relevant skills that I was willing to bet on myself that I could transfer skills from those things that I had done to that. For example, I did have to write a proposal to get funding to do my senior thesis research in college. So I was like, maybe I can use those skills to support development. I did have to market events that I was a part of organizing on my college campus. So I was like, maybe I can use that to assist with the marketing and social media management at this nonprofit. And so, I didn't necessarily work in evaluation before at a nonprofit, but I did I did do similar research. I did research projects in undergrad that I could use those skills to help me with doing nonprofit program evaluation. And so I shot my shot, right? I didn't necessarily have that exact experience, but I still applied for it and I still showed how my passions plus the things that I had done before could allow me to contribute to that. And then once I got there, I wasn't afraid to just try my hand at things, ask questions if I don't know the answer, do the research to find out if I don't automatically know, and lean on the people that are around me and willing to be a resource. So that's what I would definitely say helped me to grow professionally.
Spoken like a wise individual, honestly. Like what you just said, I could resonate so much with because I really think that like dedication and passion are like the two most important things to success, especially in like the justice system field. Um,
Yes.
Speaking of being wise, your educational journey has taken you from Princeton to the University of Chicago, some of the top colleges in the world. How has this transition influenced your perspective on racial injustices and your role in addressing it?
Let's see. I want to make sure I'm getting the question right. You said, how have my educational experiences influenced my view on racial injustices and my passion for addressing them? Okay, yes. So both of the universities that I attended and my experiences that I had there did have a significant impact. I would say Princeton more so, because college, I think for everyone, is just an incredibly formative experience. Like I said, I grew up part of my childhood in Detroit, part of it in Farmington Hills, and I saw a lot of inequality. And I heard these cultural narratives that would try to explain inequality away and say, oh, you know, people are poor because they just don't work hard. People just end up in this position because they just didn't do the right thing. And it's like, well, does that mean you're saying that everybody in the city that I'm from was just lazy and that's why that whole city is poor and that's why this whole other suburb that happens to be majority white is not? You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, this is not adding up to me. But I didn't have, like I said, I didn't have the language. I didn't have the full analysis to really make sense of it. And so for my time at Princeton specifically gave me that language. I when I took my first sociology class, I described it as though someone gave me a pair of glasses and I just started to see the world more clearly. When you start to understand that, okay, this is how social inequality works. Social inequality is actually passed down like genetics almost. Like if you start off in a certain class, you're more likely to end up in that class. Like social mobility is not a given despite this American dream that, we are taught to believe in. And even in my American studies class, learning about how, this belief in American meritocracy and that everyone has the same chance to make it in America, no matter where you start, like just learning to break those things down and question them and learn the data and the research and how those things are really not true. And learning how racial discrimination plays a role not only individually, because, as a Black girl growing up in this country, of course, I'm aware of how, stereotypes and discrimination can happen interpersonally. But in college, I learned about institutional racism. I learned about the way that, discrimination on a systemic level against Black people didn't stop after slavery. I learned about how it continued with convict leasing and Jim Crow and all these policies that are still in effect to this day, including mass incarceration. And so it just, I was never the same after my college experience. And I also experienced racism on my college campus. And so that really shaped my own sense of identity in a really important way, because I began to just experience even more how I could be treated differently because of my race. And I started to connect more with other Black students who were having similar experiences. And so my racial identity and my sense of connection to the Black community became that much more important through my time at Princeton. And so you combine my personal experience as a student with the experience of learning more about what was happening to people in my community across the country amidst the Black Lives Matter movement and the killing of Mike Brown and Eric Garner and more people like that. It was just like an explosion of all of these factors that just made me way more aware of inequality and way more passionate about addressing it on a systemic level later in my life.
Let me just begin by saying I'm so sorry for these, hardships that you've had to overcome, especially on campus. That sounds horribly scary, but I know that you use that to your advantage, and that's very smart in how you did that. You use that to your advantage to grow yourself. And I know that you have a huge future and a dream. So how do you envision the future of transformative justice as a whole, including your experience? And what steps do you believe are essential for achieving meaningful change in the criminal legal system and in the world as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. So, after being on this campaign that I've been on for the last 3 years and seeing, things progress from a policy that we wanted to get passed, to getting it implemented, and now seeing the results of it to where there are literally over 700 fewer people in Cook County Jail right now because of a policy that we worked together on and believed in and fought for. It has forever shaped my vision for the future, because what it has shown me is that there is nothing that's actually impossible. Because the people that I work with who started this campaign tell me how they were laughed out of rooms and told, you have to pick a different goal. You're not going to be able to end money bond. It's too entrenched of a system. It's been around for decades. It just is how it is. We all just have to accept it. And to work with people who came together and said, we're not going to take that for an answer. We're going to end money bond. We're literally going to start a coalition with the name Coalition to End Money Bond. And we're going to do it. Like, we're literally talking about whether we should change or sunset our name, because we literally did what we said we were going to do, like when people thought it wasn't possible. So for me, that is affecting my vision for the rest of my life, because I know that there are going to be other policies and issues that I become passionate about that seem impossible to change. The death penalty is one of them, for example. I'm really passionate about abolishing the death penalty. In some states it's happened, and in some states it looks like it would never happen. But after working on this campaign, I just don't believe that anything is impossible. And one of the people that is a mentor to me on this campaign said that, what did Charlene say? She said she was the founding executive director of the Chicago Community Bond Fund, and now she works at the Public Defender's Office. She wrote an article in Inquest called Organizers Change What's Possible. She said, lawyers advise on what's possible. Organizers change what's possible. And, funny enough, after being under the mentorship and example of people like her, I'm actually currently applying to law school because I want to be able to participate in both. I want to gain the knowledge of the legal system to advise on what's possible in the current state of things, but then I want to collaborate with organizers and people that have been impacted by the system and community members to do the work that is needed to change what is possible and to do things that seemed impossible. So that's my vision. And I think that when it comes to what's necessary, I think it takes a lot of faith. You know what, actually, I'm going to kind of go off of a Bible verse that I love. It says, these things remain, like faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. So I'm going to just start with that. Faith, I think it takes faith because you have to believe in the impossible. You have to believe that if you work together, you can do things that seemed like they could never come to pass. Without that belief, you will never even start. So I think that our movements have to have faith, but then you also have to have hope because, and I think faith and hope go together. But I know that for me, when I was first getting into this work in the criminal legal system specifically, especially when I was in my grad program, and I was actually getting inundated with it because I was, it was the focus of my program of study. So I was taking multiple classes that were covering topics like police brutality and incarceration. And I was doing an internship at the Federal Defender's Office. And so I was going and visiting clients who were in jail and incarcerated pre-trial and talking to them about their trauma so that I could try to write something that could help improve their sentence outcomes. And then in my spare time, I'm going to these panels that are hosted where people who have lost their children to police brutality are speaking about their experiences, not just people from the United States, but people from all across the world, because there was a scholar at Chicago who would bring people together to do transnational, community building and organizing. When you put those things together, it gets very overwhelming. It gets very heavy. And even though you can have faith that the work that you're doing can make a difference, you need hope, because you need hope that in the grand scheme of things and that in the larger scheme of things, justice is possible on a bigger level, not just the level of the incremental thing that you can change right now, but that in the end, things will actually be made right. And so I know that for me, when I started to feel like this work was just too heavy and I started to even question whether I was cut out for it, I went to this event that my church hosted. It was our annual summit that we would have. And somebody sang a song there that just really spoke to me. And they said, I'm going to live to see it happen. And it planted seeds of hope in me to be like, wow, in my life, I will live to see justice prevail at a greater level than I've seen it prevail thus far. And I also went and watched the movie Harriet around that time. And I was inspired by the story of Harriet Tubman because she started off in slavery, at the beginning of her life, but at the end of her life, she was able to fight in the war that literally resulted in the Emancipation Proclamation. And so I felt like I had a real living example, well, not living now, but like a real historical example of somebody that lived to see the impossible happen in their lifetime. And so that really, between my faith in God and my example of my ancestors who have come before me, it really fed my hope in a deeper way that allowed me to get back up and say, you know what, I can do this work because I have hope. And lastly, love. The Bible says the greatest of these is love. And I think love is a necessary ingredient, regardless of whether you're, from a similar faith background, different, no faith background, we need to have love for one another, because that is what undergirds justice. Cornel West said, justice is what love looks like in public. And so when we love one another and when we fight for one another from a place of love, that is where movements for justice are birthed, and that is where they are fulfilled. So that's what I would say. I think we need faith, hope, and love. Oh, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I was done.
Oh, okay. Okay, so a few more questions. That was amazing. Let me just start by saying Harriet is got to be one of my favorite movies of all time. And I am originally from Michigan, and I know exactly what you're talking about in the slums versus the impoverished people versus the impoverished people. The stark contradiction is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
And overall, really, really quickly, if you could implement one bold and innovative policy change in the criminal legal system tomorrow, what would it be? And how do you envision it creating a tangible impact on marginalized communities?
I would implement restorative justice alternatives in every jurisdiction across the country. I believe that restorative justice and transformative justice are the keys that we need as an alternative to a system that is focused on punishment. Restorative justice is all about valuing everybody as community members, even people who are accused of committing harms against others, and recognizing that our communities are still better when we are able to find ways to help people heal and be restored and even have an opportunity to right their wrongs rather than just locking them up and throwing away the key. And so I think that we should have that as an alternative to the legal system. And transformative justice is not just about restoring us in relationship with one another, but it's about addressing the root of the problem. And so where we can identify an underlying root cause of harms that are being committed between people and actually implementing solutions that get at those root issues. You know what I mean? If people are committing, acts that are coming out of desperation to survive or poverty, well, we need to address poverty. If you just keep locking people up and throwing away the key, but you don't ever get rid of poverty, then it's going to be like an assembly line. As soon as one person gets to the end of that road and ends up in prison, there's another person coming who's dealing with the same exact situation and might be pushed into the same
Yeah.
exact criminalized behavior. So
yeah, the
I
economy is
believe,
being polarized.
yeah. So I think that, I would implement restorative justice across the country because I think that there are just some jurisdictions that are using it. But I think that we'd be so much better off if the majority of our cases were routed away from this punitive, labyrinth of a legal system that just takes you through all of these mazes and traumatizing, drawn out processes only to just end you up in a cage. And if we actually try to bring people together in community to understand one another, to see one another, to hear one another, to apologize where apologies are needed, to try to make repair where repair is needed, and to actually re-envision themselves as connected and fruitful members of our society.
Well, Brianna, thank you so much for those inspiring words. We loved having you, and thank you so much for coming on. To the listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of A Second Chance Stories of Young Offenders. Remember that your story is still being written and that there's always hope for a brighter future. See you guys soon.
Thank you so much for